Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Rocket Top Insider Press Pass podcast here on this Tuesday, September 24th edition, coming at you a little earlier in the week than we normally do. Here talking Tennessee football, as always. Tennessee football coming off a big win in Norman, Oklahoma, 25-15, and the score is closer than the game actually was. But we're going to dive into that game as well as some storylines as Tennessee heads into their open date here this weekend before traveling to Fayetteville, Arkansas next weekend. I got Rick Butler and Ryan Shepard with me today. Ryan, how you doing?
I'm doing well. Glad to be back on here, and a nice little open date podcast, and some news out of Oklahoma yesterday as they're fully abandoning Jackson Arnold. I don't expect too much drama on the Tennessee front this week, but still plenty to talk about for the Vols moving forward.
Yeah, Rick, it was quite the game for, just not looking at it from a Tennessee perspective, but Oklahoma obviously had themselves a rough night Saturday night, and making this big of a change, it's not, I guess, surprising given how their season has gone, and even in the wins, Oklahoma's offense has largely looked bad. So they need some kind of spark. I guess this is the route the Sooners have to take, but it is a little surprising to bench your 5-star quarterback this early into the season when you just look at it from a grand scheme of things.
It is, and Ryan just hit it off the top of the head. Michael Hawkins Jr. will start against Auburn coming up this Saturday on the road. But you're right. I think when you're talking about quarterback struggles, you need something that you can build on. And I just don't think there's a lot with Jackson Arnold right now. I think you either need a level of consistency or you need a level of dynamic ability to make explosive plays. And he didn't really have either one of those, especially on Saturday night against Tennessee. I think Michael Hawkins Jr., we'll see about the consistency, but I think he at least brings them a level of explosivity that can, help that offense when it's just struggling to get going. So I'm not surprised with this change at all. Jackson Arnold was the 4th-ranked quarterback in Nico Iamaleava's class. Depending on who you look at in the rankings, Arch Manning, Nico Iamaleava, they're 1 and 2. Dante Moore, the kid who went to UCLA, I believe, first, then he went to Oregon. He was number 3, but Jackson Arnold was right back there as well. I believe he was a top 15 prospect in that 2023 class. So Nico, Arch Manning, kind of all right there in the same category. They're all making headlines together, but I think it's quite telling when you have one quarterback who's sort of ascending on his, I wouldn't call it a Heisman campaign right now, but it's ascending on the start of what is projected to be a great career. Then you have Jackson Arnold, who's getting benched going into Game 5. So I think there's a bit of a world of difference between those two guys, but I'm not surprised about it.
Well, it's an intro. I mean, that was a really good quarterback class. I mean, the top 5 quarterbacks are top 12. Looking at it now in the 24/7's composite rankings. Arch obviously looks really good when he's played. Nico looks really good. Dante Moore, I think, is kind of the wait-and-see guy. He struggled last year, but went to Oregon basically to sit on something you don't see much. He transferred somewhere to sit on the bench and learn. Arnold doesn't look good, but I'll give him credit. He's been better than Malachi Nelson, who was the number 12 player, who went to USC and then transferred to Boise State and didn't win the starting job at Boise State this year. So, Jackson Arnold might not be looking great for him, but he's looking better than Malachi Nelson right now.
And I could be wrong, but I think that Nelson was rated high. I think he fell a little bit in those rankings. I believe it was Manning, Iamaleava, and then Nelson, and then he sort of got taken down a few pegs. But it is a fascinating prospect class to watch unfold now that it's been settling in here for about 2 years.
Yeah, that Malachi Nelson thing. I remember when he didn't win the Boise job this offseason. That just doesn't happen a lot. That was a huge storyline because Boise, obviously a G5 contender, still are. And to have that big of a prospect not win the starting job at Boise, it's crazy. But yeah, a lot of different, even Nico versus like an Arch, the ways that college careers go. It's just intriguing to see how it all pans out. And this is kind of the beef I have with recruiting anyway, because it's like, oh, got this 5-star prospect, and then a couple years down the road, it's like, okay, totally fizzled out. So that's why I don't put a whole lot of stock in recruiting.
But then you see situations that never fails to surprise me when you've got a kid like Ryan Williams at Alabama, who can step in and be a dynamic wide receiver for them right away, and that's a very good team as well. So I'm totally with you. It's so volatile, just kind of the routes that these guys can go, depending on wherever they're ranked in the recruiting class.
Well, it's funny. I'm not positive the high school Ryan Williams played at, maybe Saraland.
Okay.
And last year, like early in the season, before college football starts, they have all those games on ESPN. They played Lipscomb in Nashville, which is where Caleb Beasley is, or Caleb Beasley went, and those two guys matched up. And Ryan Williams had a nice game, but Caleb Williams stood his own against him, had an interception in that game. And not that Caleb Beasley's not going to be a good player or anything, but you see Ryan Williams, who reclassified, was a junior, is one of the best receivers in the SEC already. And Caleb Beasley is, nowhere close to being on the field for Tennessee, which isn't to say he's not going to be a good player or anything, but it's, you watch a high school game here or there, and it's hard to, it makes you feel for the guys that are doing the scouting, because it's a difficult job.
Yeah.
25-15, Tennessee gets the win. After how NC State has completely fallen apart, I think we could say this was Tennessee's first real test, just because NC State looks bad. Those neutral site, this on the road. I don't care if you say Oklahoma's offense is horrible or that Oklahoma is not among the top 7-8 SEC teams. This is still a pretty big test for Tennessee, and specifically for Nico Iamaleava in his young career, to go on the road and win a game like this. And Tennessee's defense, Rick, looks the part yet again. One of the best units in all of college football. This D-line, probably the best in the sport. What is something you're still thinking about when you look back at Tennessee's win on Saturday night?
Oh, what is something I'm still thinking about? Do you mean that in kind of is there a negative I'm still thinking about, or just what do you mean a takeaway?
Yeah, just a takeaway.
My takeaway is kind of leading off of what you just said there. It's that, people have, in these first 48 hours after the game, some people are talking about what is the magnitude of this win and how impressive is this win and where's Oklahoma and, how bad did Oklahoma lose, things like that. Not to me. To me, this was an impressive win. It takes a lot to go and win an SEC game. It takes a lot to go and win an SEC game on the road. It takes even more to go and win an SEC game on the road against an opponent that, is fired up to play you, is fired up to make a statement against you, and it's at night in their own building. There was so much off the field storylines that went into this game. I couldn't have been more impressed just about how Tennessee kept their composure through it all. I thought that was really important, and I think that shows something for this team moving forward. The fact that they could go into that game, they could handle their business, but again, they could keep their composure. Not everything went right for Tennessee. Yes, we're going to talk about how impressive the defensive performance was, but going back to that North Carolina State game in a similar fashion, there were a couple of turnovers that Tennessee had to flush and turn the page from. I thought that Tennessee did a nice job of doing that, and I thought that Tennessee's defense did a nice job of responding to when Tennessee's offense had some of those turnovers. So one of my big takeaways is just that, yes, we can get into maybe some of the players or X's and O's and things like that, but just Tennessee's overall composure going into Oklahoma and winning this game, I don't care what people say. To me, it is an impressive win. It was a test that Tennessee passed with a successful mark. So that's what I'm taking away here on Tuesday morning. It's just that, hey, Tennessee showed a lot of composure, and I think that's something that they can carry forward through in this season.
Ryan, what about you? Just like a big picture thing that maybe you feel differently about with Tennessee after that game? Anything you're still thinking about pretty strongly here on this Tuesday morning?
Yeah, I think, in terms of differently, and again, I'm not sure either of these two things, one positive, one negative. I'm not sure either of them are too different, but just further maximized, or their importance is more and more significant, is the offensive tackle play, or the offensive line play as a whole, just needing to get healthy. That's, I think, the biggest thing that could keep this team from playing deep in the playoff, going 11-1, having just a great season, I think, is the offensive line. And some of that too goes into Nico, at times they have a little bit better internal clock, needing to tuck the ball and take a sack in the pocket and not fumble. Because I do think Tennessee can live with some sacks and some negative plays offensively, because their defense is good. What you can't do is turn the ball over on those plays at your own 6-yard line. You're not going to get away with that most of the time. So I think it's the need to get healthy. It's, maybe a little bit of skepticism when it comes to John Campbell and his ability to stay healthy. Yeah, he just struggled to stay healthy last year. He played, anything about it, it was midway through the third quarter when he got hurt, or second quarter, I believe, when he got hurt in this game. He played 34 snaps. It's the second most snaps he's played in the game this season. They've been rotating a lot with him. So it just doesn't feel like he's going to be a guy that can go out there and play 70 snaps a game. And if Lance Hurd's healthy and Lance Hurd can play 70 snaps a game, it's not the end of the world. But when Lance Hurd is injured and not out there, like, that becomes a lot bigger deal. So that I think is long term the biggest thing that I think with this team could really hold them back. And then on the positive side, it's just another sample size that Tennessee's defense is really good. And yes, I don't think Oklahoma's offense is any good, but the level of domination I don't think matters, given that Oklahoma's offense is really bad. It was just a completely shut down performance, what you would expect from the best, what it would look like, Josh Heupel's nameless, faceless opponents. If Tennessee had random black jerseys on with no logo on it and you didn't know who it was, and you said Oklahoma's offense is bad, here's the game, you'd say, well, that's what one of the best defenses in the country would do to them. And it's the same thing with NC State, where they're bad, but they did the exact same. I mean, they just completely suffocated. It's like watching Georgia play bad teams over the last handful of years. So there's still some question marks with Tennessee's defense, but even though the opponents maybe haven't been the best, what they're doing to Power 4 opponents gives me a lot of confidence that this defense is really, really good and chance to be top 10, 15, 20, whatever you want to say in the sport.
Yeah, Rick, it's just what makes me a little angry about some takeaways I've seen from this game, not in Tennessee media, but just across college football, is that how bad Oklahoma's offense was, Jackson Arnold, all these turnovers, Oklahoma's major issues. It's like, well, yes, Tennessee made Oklahoma's offense really bad in this game. Like, to me, it was more Tennessee's defense doing that than Oklahoma's offense just being really bad. Oklahoma not being able to run the ball at all, that's because of Tennessee's defense. Pressure in the face all night long, that's because of Tennessee's defense. Like, yes, Arnold made some mistakes, but I honestly didn't think he was just falling flat on his face at every turn. It was because he had no help, receivers hurt, O-line wasn't protecting well, couldn't run the ball. And all of that, besides the injuries, is because Tennessee's defense was doing that to Oklahoma's offense. I think that's more the storyline to take away here, whereas it doesn't really feel like that's the storyline a lot of national media are taking away.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I think that this game represents it on a better scale, but I sort of hold the same thought when I talk about this Chattanooga and Kent State game and even the North Carolina State game as well. Yes, you're talking about a struggling offense with the Oklahoma Sooners right now, but wouldn't you expect Tennessee's defense to then just utterly dominate them? Well, that's what they did, right? Jackson Arnold had 54 passing yards when he was benched in the game. Let's think about that. Oklahoma benched their 5-star quarterback in a night game in their own stadium, right? That's not just, hey, Tennessee's defense played well against a bad offense. No, that's Tennessee's defense made life miserable for a bad offense. They made it so miserable that Oklahoma had to go put in a freshman quarterback before halftime just to get them a little bit of, a little bit of movement so they could take that into halftime and say, all right, what are we going to do with this now? So that's kind of the way that I've been looking at these first couple games. I wrote about this on RTI yesterday and just saying that, yes, you can look at the Chattanooga game. You can look at the Kent State game, North Carolina State game included. Yes, Tennessee has handled business against these teams, and there is a large difference in sort of the gaps between them. But again, you would also expect Tennessee to dominate these teams, and in a big sense, that's what they've done. So that's my takeaway, is that yes, Tennessee played a struggling offense on Saturday, but they shut it down. They forced a quarterback switch. What more can you possibly ask for? And then they had to, deal with a different type of backup quarterback who brought in some dynamic ability into the game. And Tennessee had to adjust. Tennessee kind of got maybe caught on their heels a little bit in the second half. So, yeah, I think that this was a dominant performance for Tennessee. And it's why I started by saying that I don't see it as any less than impressive because their offense struggled. I think that Tennessee's defense. One more thing is that you look at one of the first plays of the game, Tyree West getting into the backfield and getting that sack. He just obliterated the Oklahoma tight end who was moving over from the slot to try to go, pick up the block on the backside. He just obliterated him. I mean, Tennessee's defense was powering through their trenches throughout the night, and that's not going to be an easy recipe for success if you're on the other side of that.
Yeah, Tennessee's it's just so deep. I mean, Jackson Moy making plays in the third quarter, right? Yeah. He's in the 3 deep. Tennessee's just got guys everywhere wreaking havoc there.
Yeah, they do. Okay, Jack, you noticed that because I pulled it on the Chase Thomas podcast last night. So, Rick, I'll trivia question, ask it to you. Oklahoma's offense had 102 yards in the first quarter. How many yards combined do you think they had in the second and the third quarter?
I think that they maybe only had 20 to 30 in the second quarter. I think that they gained a little bit more in the third because Hawkins came in, but Hawkins really didn't get things going until the fourth. I would say less than the first quarter combined.
-4 yards.
Oh!
Had negative yards in 2 quarters.
That was way worse than I thought. Yeah.
Well, I still think you might have had to. I can't remember. Ethan Stone won the guest on the Chase Thomas podcast last night. I think your guess was still better than his, though. So I think you're still the best guess I've heard so far. And one thing I would say, Jack, to your point about the general tone of how the national media has talked about this game. What offenses are Tennessee like? Mississippi State is going to be just as bad offensively. Kentucky is going to be just as bad offensively. Florida will probably be a little bit better. They're not great. Arkansas, like besides Alabama and Georgia and the SEC games that Tennessee plays, it's like Arkansas and Vanderbilt are the only ones that I'm like, yeah, their offenses are probably better. And Vanderbilt throws the ball so much, I'm not sure it's or throws the ball so little, excuse me. They run the ball so much, I'm not sure it's hardly going to matter against this run defense. So, yes, these offenses are bad, and I'm sure Alabama will be a lot better and be able to do more. But when I just look at the way Alabama attacks in the passing game, very vertically, not a whole lot. In the intermediate passing game is where I really think you can hurt Tennessee's defense. Alabama doesn't do that very well. So I'm skeptical that they're going to be able to do it. Like Georgia is the only team I look at right now. And I'm like, that is an offense that I think can exploit Tennessee's weaknesses defensively. Doesn't mean I think they're going to, I think Tennessee's defense will play well enough in that game that Tennessee will remain in the game, even if the offense struggles. But that's the only, when we're talking about Tennessee's defense and just, NC State and Oklahoma are terrible offensively, I just don't see too many teams on Tennessee's schedule that are really going to be able to do a ton or make it look like where Tennessee's defense doesn't look like it's one of the best in the sport.
Fair point. I mean, Arkansas has been fun, so that'll be.
Yeah,
I am legitimately.
Did they bench their guy last week during the game?
No, they won.
Okay.
Auburn.
Oh, okay. So I guess I knew Auburn took down Hank Brown, but
yeah.
Okay.
But I'm legitimately intrigued by Arkansas game. I think Tennessee wins big, but on the road they can score, so it's like okay. Vandy, we'll see at the end of the season. Don't think it really matters all that much. But yeah, you're right, Ryan. It's Miss State and Florida, the SEC Toilet Bowl last week. And we'll see if Billy Napier's still there when Florida rolls into Knoxville. But it's a pretty easy schedule. And we said this before the year that Tennessee's schedule was very gettable, and it was really 3 games. And now, and Ryan was arguing 4, but 2 of those are gone, and they were pretty dominant wins. So.
Yeah, so one thing to follow up on that real quick, I was just, and I guess this is maybe a good time to bring this up because we're not previewing a game or anything coming up this weekend, but just kind of looking at, to that point right there, we knew coming into the season that Tennessee's big 3 games with playoff implications was going to be OU, Alabama, Georgia, right? As long as you could win the rest of them, then you were going to be in a pretty good position. Tennessee started the season at about a 36% chance to make the playoffs, according to ESPN's FPI, which some people might look at the FPI and roll their eyes or something. It's 20,000 simulation. So I think it's a pretty good idea and gives some pretty good talking points. After the North Carolina State game, that number had bumped up to about 63%. Now, after the Oklahoma game, that number has bumped up to about 80.6%. Tennessee's got the 3rd best chances to make the playoffs, at least right now. I know there's still a lot that has to unfold, but in terms of the percentage chances, Tennessee's is the 3rd highest in the nation right now. That win over Oklahoma, it's hard to overstate how much that impacted Tennessee's playoff chances. Now you're looking at the Georgia and the Alabama game. And again, I don't want to get too far ahead of myself, but I'm not on the team, so I can kind of overlook Kentucky and anybody else right now. If Tennessee just splits Alabama and Georgia, they've got about a 99% chance to make the playoffs, regardless of any sort of outcome in the SEC championship. Obviously, if they win the SEC championship, they're going to have a bye in the first round. But even if they don't make it, even if they lose, as long as you kind of split Alabama and Georgia, you've still got a pretty good chance. Even if Tennessee loses those 2 games, though, you finish with a 10-2 record, but a win against Oklahoma, Tennessee still got a 91% chance to make it, and they're probably going to be around a 10 seed in that region. So there's still a lot of season left to be played. I'm not going to go ahead and crown Tennessee as playoff, entrance right now. They still need to, but they've got a good route. But I just want to say that, that Oklahoma game, it was one of the big three that, Jack, you just mentioned that we talked about before the season. And the statistics and the numbers and the projections, it really backs it up that game, it did a lot for Tennessee's playoff chances. So now they're on this road. Now they got to start, figuring out how this goes. They're in a good position. They've got to continue keeping this momentum, but it did a lot for them.
To me, it feels like 10-2, most very likely they get in. Probably in the path where they don't get in at 10-2, especially if they maybe get blown out in one of the losses. But almost certainly gets in. And 11-1 is the difference in playing a home game to start in your first game in the playoffs as opposed to having to go on the road.
Yes.
So that's or potentially even having to play like the 1 seed in your second game. If you go 10-2, you're probably down there lower. Where if you 11-1, you're probably like the 6 or you get Miami or
maybe
a good team certainly. Yeah, it's no doubt you're going to be playing a good team, but a little bit more manageable when it comes to trying to make it to the semis.
Yeah, I think Tennessee, it can't be a lock, I guess, because 10-2 could get muddy, but it's a major disappointment if Tennessee does make the playoff at this point. I think it has to be just because of how good these wins have been, and the thought that Nico, this offense only going to get better. Like this passing offense still hasn't flourished in any game, by the way. It's still yet to break out. So,
yeah, and especially because there's still opportunity abounding in the SEC, right? Georgia's got a miserable schedule coming up. They've still got to play Alabama, Texas, and Tennessee. Alabama's got some good competitors. Ole Miss has some big games coming up. So there's still a lot to happen in this SEC, but I think that Tennessee is sitting in a position where they can say, all right, we have the ability to take advantage of maybe some of the twists and turns that might unfold here in the next couple months. So I think Tennessee is sitting in a great position. And again, that win over Oklahoma, it wasn't always guaranteed in the past, but Tennessee did a great job of handling business, puts them in a great position moving forward.
Yeah, it's funny. We had David Pollock on Always College Football this week, and he was talking, of course, Georgia alum, talking about the Bulldogs and that no team ever in college football with this type of schedule goes undefeated. And I've always just been like, this whole offseason, this season so far, well, it's Georgia. I would pick them in every game. Maybe they don't go 11-1, but 12-0 is definitely on the table. It's Georgia. But when you really think about it, 3 road trips to Bama, Texas, and Ole Miss, and then Tennessee, who has this elite defense. Tennessee is the last team there. And I just wonder that, like Pollock said, he's like, they are going to slip up. And I've kind of thought that maybe it's this weekend, the last couple of days. I'm like, maybe just Alabama wins. They have Kirby's number for the most part. Maybe Alabama just gets it done this week. I don't know. But when does that happen? I think Tennessee, it's on the table that happens, just because Georgia will have played all 3 of those games this season so far to that point. And this defense can pound you. And Carson Beck, I think that offense is like, you can make it really tough on them. Look what Kentucky did. You can shut down that offense. There's a way it can happen. And I don't know, man. I worry about Nico and Tennessee's offense in that game, but who knows? It could just be a complete slugfest, 13-10. And Tennessee can win those types of games. So I think anything's on the table. 12-0 is on the table for Tennessee now at this point for me. I would still pick Georgia to win that game. I'd still pick 11-1 right now. But an undefeated season is on the table just because of how great this defense is. I mean, honestly, if Tennessee's offense was a complete nightmare in Norman and hadn't done anything, I don't think Tennessee's defense allows a touchdown. Like, there was a lot of, comfortable lead, run the ball, try to get the clock running as fast as possible. Let's get out of here. And the defense was a little bend, don't breaky, right? And at the end, the circumstances, Oklahoma ended up scoring a couple of times. Really garbage touchdowns in my book. But I don't know. It just felt like if Tennessee wanted to, they could have pushed the pedal to the metal and probably beat Oklahoma by 30. They just didn't. 10 points is not indicative of how that game went.
Yeah, and to your point about the Georgia game, I guess a couple thoughts there. Georgia's offense is the game's a long way away. So Georgia, as Josh Heupel always talks about, good teams getting better. Georgia always seems to get a lot better as the year goes on. That offense isn't very explosive right now. Like, who and what skill guy on Georgia's offense?
Dylan Bowe, that's it.
Yeah, you're really worried about. And Tennessee's defensive line's so good, it's just hard, I think, to consistently drive the ball down the field. I mean, one of Oklahoma's under 2 scoring drives, they get the long pass play because Christian Harrison slips down on the terrible field. And then the other drive, I mean, it was a turnover on downs. If Arian Carter doesn't brush the Michael Hawkins face mask with his pinky finger, then it's a turnover on downs. And they can't move the ball the whole way down the field slowly like that. I will say on the Georgia game, too, I think it plays to Tennessee's advantage that it's the week after Ole Miss. It's not like, I mean, how many times did Herb Street talk between game day and the game of Oklahoma's been preparing for this game for 6 months. This is the game they've been scouting. Georgia's not going to have the ability to do that. And you look at Tennessee's schedule, it falls pretty well for them on the opponent's bye weeks. None of the big games does an opponent have the bye the week before. Even this week, or next game in Arkansas, where I think that outside of the 2 big games, this is probably the game that's next most likely that Tennessee would drop. Arkansas is a huge game this week at A&M that they need to win. So I think that part plays to Tennessee's advantage. And I will just add on, while Georgia does get screwed with the schedule this year, I don't feel bad for them. They got so lucky with the schedule for a decade and a half with getting Auburn every year in the West instead of Alabama or LSU. They played Nick Saban like twice in the regular season in a 15-year stretch. So I have no feeling bad for them. I do feel bad for Oklahoma. How did Texas and Oklahoma join the league this year, and Texas get an incredibly easy conference schedule, and Oklahoma just get
brutal,
absolutely, just decimated with the schedule that they were given? That I feel bad for Oklahoma. I don't feel bad for Georgia.
Hey, one last thing on Georgia, because I would like to now hop on this train and talk about the Bulldogs game for a second. You guys talked about both really good points, but I'll talk about one last thing. So looking at the rest of Georgia's schedule, their home games, they've got Auburn at home. They've got Mississippi State at home. Florida's going to be a neutral location. And then they've got UMass and Georgia Tech at home, I believe, as well. Tennessee as well. Tennessee is the only. I know Auburn's a big rivalry game, but I think they're going to win that one pretty handedly. Tennessee's really the last kind of game that they're going to be able to get in that stadium and get hyped for.
Yeah.
I do think that is going to be a wickedly hostile environment, because I think this Georgia fan base is also going to see their team have to go on the road to play at Texas, at Alabama, at Ole Miss. So they're going to maybe, have a lot of those feelings coming back and say, hey, we need to make our impact on this Tennessee game. But at the same time, I look back at that Oklahoma game and I say that, hey, Tennessee handled a hostile environment well. It wasn't the Georgia atmosphere that they saw in 2022. It wasn't even as bad as some of the others that we've seen Tennessee go through in the last couple of years. But yeah, this is a team that can play on the road because of their defensive ability, because of their ability to play in the trenches, because of their ability to quiet down opposing crowds simply by getting a sack from Tyree West on the first play of the game. I think that those are all things that will help this Tennessee team going forward. So, while I do give Georgia a little bit of credit that that's their big home game this season. Again, Auburn's a rival, but that's their big home game that they have to win in front of their fans. So I do think that they're going to be up for it. I do think that that's going to be the one that all those Bulldogs in Athens have circled on their calendar. But I think that Tennessee is built for a hostile environment more than they have been in the past based on what we saw Saturday.
Yeah, Rick, that's a good point. And and Jack, I know you still saying you're not picking Tennessee to win that game or anything. That's where I struggle to get there with like the Tennessee being the team that trips up Georgia aspect, is all of Georgia's other tough games are on the road. And if it feels like it's going to be one of those that trips them up. And if they do get tripped up in one of those, I just think they're going to be so locked in for that Tennessee game.
They're going to have to be.
I was about to say, I think ball fans should be dog fans for those games.
Yeah.
Because you don't want it to be a must, I guess it wouldn't be a must-win unless they lost 2, but you don't want it to be you have to win to make it to Atlanta game for Georgia.
Yes,
because
exactly.
Then,
yeah.
And that's what, again, and it's not like, and I'm going to tie these 2 points in because, Rick, something you said, maybe just think about it. It's not like 22 where Tennessee's offense has to be great to win. Like, you feel like Tennessee's not going to get blown out because their defense. And that, Rick, is why I feel like Tennessee is better equipped on the road this year than they've been in the past. It's just that you fall behind 10-0 in a game, a big game on the road the last 3 years under Josh Heupel. It's like the offense has to be perfect the rest of the way. And it's just on the road, especially with this offense and the way the noise can affect it, it's just hard to be perfect against good. I mean, ever it is, but especially against good defenses on the road. I think just the leeway that this defense gives Tennessee to play things a little bit more conservatively and not not have to the chances of them falling behind early aren't nearly as big. I think that bodes well for them in hostile environments.
Yeah, and Nico just feels like he's composed as well as we got some sort of pop up. Interesting. I don't know how that happened. Anyway, but if you were watching, some weird StreamYard pop up happened. Gone now, all good. But yeah, it just feels like to me, Nico said before the season he loves road games. It feels like he's just really composed and mature. And yeah, he got
Agree.
couple of sack fumbles, but that's not really on him. Maybe he needs to have a little bit pocket awareness, better pocket awareness, I guess, step up a little bit better, but I don't know. I have so much more confidence in this Tennessee team because of they have substance, Ryan. It's like they win in the trenches and they have a quarterback who is mature enough and, well beyond his years to handle this type of environment.
Yeah, they do. And again, I think that's the exciting about Tennessee is it feels like their offense can get a lot better. And
Oh yeah, it is.
I think I
not
mentioned it on
great.
our post game pod that the exciting thing to me always about Nico has been what he can do when plays break down, which could become important as this offensive line looks a little bit shaky with some of the injuries. I think you're going to see more and more of that. I mean, his two most impressive plays of the year, in my opinion, are two plays that got called back on broken plays, and the one on Saturday, which I think also it doesn't change the game because Tennessee never lost control of the game, but it probably changes the final score a little bit if that Dante Thornton throw in the first drive of the second half doesn't get called back. Didn't really look like a hold to me, and it certainly wasn't a hold that affected the play. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
It wasn't like, all right, well, if that hold didn't happen, Nico gets sacked, and that play never happens anyway. So I think you're going to continue to see more of that. And I think just the way Nico's going to run the ball, to me, is still really intriguing. I mean, he had a couple runs in this Oklahoma game that to me felt like they would have been really good runs in big moments if he didn't slip. I mean, again, you talk about the final score when it's 22-3. He has that third down run. It looks like he for sure got it, even with slipping. It was the right call. When his knee went down, his body was still upright. It hadn't fallen forward. It's like that's just an easy first down on most fields this year. Even to play on maybe the first or second drive where he made the two dudes slip and fall too. He kind of slips again, cutting and falls down short of the sticks, and they hand it off and don't get it. So I think a lot of the stuff that Nico does off script as he gets a better feel for SEC defenses and plays on a little bit better field, I think bode well for maybe the ceiling of this offense.
And one thing I wanted to mention and kind of follow up and add on to that, and I don't know where's the best time to say this, but I think now while we're talking about the offense, I said this after the North Carolina State game, and I feel a lot more confident about it now seeing 60 more minutes of football on the field. But this is going to be a Tennessee team that faces good defenses. We've talked about it. Georgia and Alabama are still left on the table. Not every game is going to be a 40-point, 50-point barrage from Tennessee. There's going to be drives like in this Oklahoma game where they struggle to get things going, where you face a quality defensive line like what the Sooners had. I think what's different about this Tennessee offense, though, is that they have those explosive plays under their belt. There are times where Tennessee can rip off an explosive play. They might lull you to sleep a little bit with a couple of runs early. They might have a 6-and-out, if you will. They might not advance the ball, to midfield a couple of straight drives, but they always have that big play ability based on what's on the outside and based on who's behind center at quarterback. So I really feel like that's an advantageous spot for Tennessee to be able to just say, hey, look, we don't have to get all of our points in bunches. We don't have to, keep the foot on the gas the whole time. Now, obviously, that's what you'd like for, but that's not always going to be the reality. But Tennessee's got that explosive ability. You saw it in the Oklahoma game, going over the top to Brew McCoy, going across the middle to Dante Thornton. Those were big explosive plays that really kind of turned the course of the game. So I think that's a big thing to watch out for here in the next, now that we get to the next third of the season, if you will. We saw that a little bit in the North Carolina State game, but at least me personally, I feel a lot better about just that explosive ability after this Oklahoma game. You might get lulled to sleep sometimes. They might not always be successful, but that big play ability is going to be in the bag.
Ryan, it feels like if there's one thing that is going to sink Tennessee this season and be the reason Tennessee completely falls flat in a game, loses by a lot, it's just because the offense cannot move the ball. And that is probably at the root of the issue would be offensive line, specifically offensive tackle. Now, when we think about this offensive tackle position, Lance was out against Oklahoma. Larry Johnson had to play a lot. graded out well on PFF grade. Didn't play horrible. Dane Davis didn't have a good game at all. John Campbell continues to struggle to play full games. Snap counts never high. You said 34 snaps, most he's played this season. Again, got hurt. So how important, I should say, that's the question I want to ask. How important is it that Tennessee gets Lance Hurd back healthy, especially down the stretch with these big games?
I think it's extremely, extremely important. And it's what you said. I think there's some other areas where Tennessee's not great, where Tennessee could not win the national championship because of this or that. Sinking them, that's the only thing I think can sink them is offensive line depth in line of scrimmage play. So it's extremely important because of what we said earlier about the fact that John Campbell is not playing a ton of snaps, even when he is out there, when he is healthy, is that you feel like Tennessee can patch it together a little bit. If it's the same thing, you go back to 22. Tennessee was not great at left tackle with Gerald Mincey and Jeremiah Crawford. Those guys, not that they were bad, but they split time all year. It was never a problem because they were incredible at right tackle, and you could be man up every single time. Don't need to slide any help. Don't need a running back on that side. Don't need a tight end. Darnell Wright's going to hold it down. Deal with all that stuff on the other side, and it makes your life a lot easy. Obviously, Lance Hurd's not going to be Darnell Wright this year, but if he can just be steady and a guy that's out there every week and solid, and all right, you live with a few mistakes, but you don't have to. It's a lot easier playing offensive line and pass protection if you just have to worry about one side as opposed to two. And right now, when Lance Hurd's out, it feels like they got to worry about two. And I'm not positive Lance Hurd's just going to be dominant when he's out there. He's been better in run blocking than he has in pass protection in the 2 games that he played. But you just feel a lot more solid about it if that's the case.
One thing I'll add on to that as well, just kind of rewatching some of the highlights and some of the film from yesterday too. And I don't know this on a full scale, so maybe I shouldn't even be saying this, but I thought there's been really nice moments from Tennessee's running back pass protection this year as well. There was a play in the Oklahoma game where the pocket collapsed. I believe it was actually Nico's second fumble. It was a coverage sack. It was, the pocket just it collapsed over time. It wasn't necessarily something where Tennessee just let him into the backfield right away. But Desean Bishop picked up a really nice pass protection block. Yep. I'm intrigued to see how those guys continue to evolve in that because it is so important. Now, again, I don't know what kind of grade to give them through the first 4 games. It's not the aspect that I've been watching specifically the most of. But I have felt like that when I've seen it in action, it's been useful. It's been working. At least it feels like those top 2 guys, Dylan Sampson and Desean Bishop, at least just have a bit of a fearless mindset when going and trying to throw a shoulder into an edge rusher that's coming around the edge, try to get a little chip right there. So eager to see how Tennessee's running backs pass protection continues to hold up and continues to kind of elevate it if they can to some of the things you're talking about in addition to Ryan.
Here's a stat for you.
Yeah, go for it.
PFF grade, so not really a stat. Desean Bishop's pass block grade this year, 82.1. Dylan Sampson's 44.1.
Oh,
okay. Dylan Sampson, it's tanked by 2. He was terrible against Oklahoma in pass protection. He was bad against Chattanooga. He was good in the NC State game, good in the Kent State game. But Desean Bishop, for a guy that
maybe my Bishop praise was.
Yeah. No, Bishop is a great pass blocker. That's the best thing he does. Like, he's a good running back.
Which is impressive for a guy that carried the ball every single play in high school, tore his ACL as a true freshman, and is playing for the first time this year.
Yeah, I mean, this is what makes him a legit prospect, in my opinion. And Sampson's so shifty, so elusive, has great vision, but that's the thing that he's the worst at for sure is pass blocking. He's never been great at it at Tennessee. This, to me, is really a 1A, 1B situation. And the reason it's that is because of how good Bishop is in pass blocking scenarios. You can't take Sampson off the field a lot because of the dynamic ability he has and that Bishop just doesn't have. I mean, just watching it with your bare eyes, you could see the difference that Sampson has running the ball than Desean Bishop. But it's not to say Bishop is bad back when he's running the ball either. Both are really good. Both are going to play a lot. I thought their usage against Oklahoma is indicative of how it will be the rest of the season in big games. This is, I think, what you'll see more times than not. It's not a workhorse scenario with Sampson, and it shouldn't be. It should be these 2 backs and probably just these 2 backs getting a lot of run. And I like what Tennessee's doing with the running back group right now.
I was fielding texts during the game, and I'm sure you guys might have been as well. Just some people kind of asking, or some people intrigued if Dylan Sampson gotten hurt or if he was limited or something like that. And I thought, I think that Desean Bishop is just doing some really good things, and you can tell. This coaching staff was high on Desean Bishop going into the season. They were high on him last season, and I think you can certainly tell why. But I guess my point to Bishop's pass protection, where I've seen him, I guess that was more valid. Ryan, I cut you off a minute ago if you had anything more, but I'm glad that the numbers kind of track with that.
I was just going to add 49 snaps for Dylan Sampson, 24 for Desean Bishop in the Oklahoma game, which I'm surprised it wasn't a little bit more even just from watching it live. But that's what
24
it was. 24
snaps?
Yep.
Well, he had 16 carries. That's wild.
Yep,
right?
16 carries.
They fed him when he was in.
6 pass blocks, 6 plays in pass block, 2 plays running routes, according to PFF. So again, that's a small sample. I mean, he's got 14 snaps in pass block all season. So, while he does have very good grade, small sample size.
Yeah. But I like the way he just throws himself into a guy. I think it's it shows a little bit of fearlessness. I could never. I'd get broken in half like a saltine cracker. It'd just be snapped. Couldn't do it.
And like I said to Ryan a little bit earlier, Rick, is that my big worry with Tennessee and just falling flat in a game would be because of the offense and really the passing offense. Nico not having any time or just having a bad game. I do think this running game Tennessee has gives them a pretty solid floor offensively, and with the defense always probably going to keep them in games. Like, I never see Tennessee trailing by more than 14 in a game, really, ever, barring like some special teams touchdown or like a pick six. Like, it's going to have to really spiral on all 3 phases of the ball, with really just offense being that bad and giving up a defensive touchdown or special teams touchdown, something like that. I don't see Tennessee trailing by more than 14 because defense allows multiple scores. So with this running game can be solid enough and be the backbone of this Tennessee offense, which I think it is, and defense always keeping them in games, it's hard to see Tennessee ever truly just having a disastrous performance, even if the offense is horrible.
Yeah, there's 2 things that come to my mind, and it's beating yourself, right? It's turnovers and it's penalties, and you've seen Tennessee combat both of those things this year. They've faced, I believe they had a pretty good amount of penalties in that Oklahoma game. You've seen a couple of turnovers in both of their top 25 matchups so far. So not that those things have to necessarily be flawless perfect, but you got to get a little bit, those reined in. But I think that this is a Tennessee team where you can say, hey, offense and defense, I think they can compete with anybody in the nation. For Tennessee, though, you just don't want to beat yourselves. And I think that's when, we're talking about the top 5 best teams in the country right now. You're not necessarily talking about Tennessee last year where it's, hey, how can the 22nd ranked team get up to the 18th ranked team? No, this is Tennessee dealing with the big boys. You can't beat yourself. You can't make those kind of self-inflicted mistakes right there. So I think that's certainly an area for Tennessee to clean up a little bit more. But I think that's, to Jack, to your point, I think that's where if Tennessee spirals, if they fall behind by a double-digit amount, a significant amount at any time this year, I think it's going to say more about kind of, is Tennessee turning the ball over? Are they penalizing themselves at a high rate? Things like that, as opposed to just, is Tennessee getting outmatched, out-schemed on the field? I think that's less likely, and I think that the self-inflicted wounds is more likely in that situation. So, yeah, just, like Curb Herbstreit said after the game, don't listen to the compliments. Don't rest on your laurels. Keep your competitive edge, and I think that's important moving forward.
He should go by Kirby. Kirk Herbstreit, Herbie, Kirk combined.
Kirby. It's pretty good.
One quick player shout out: Josh Josephs, man, having an excellent start to the season, and what a game he had in Norman. Only played 30 snaps, earned a 94.3 PFF grade, 3 tackles, had the strip, TFL. Josh Josephs is blossoming here this season. And when you think about Tyree West breaking out too, the edges of this defensive line just so lethal, Ryan. And Josh Josephs doing what he's done so far this season has been big.
Yeah, Josh Josephs, I mean, he's all the preseason hype that he's gotten, he's lived up to. And it's, now that he's been good rushing the passer, but I mean, it's just been incredible in run defense. According to PFF, he's got the highest run defensive grade from any player, no matter the position in all of college football. Co-SEC defensive lineman of the week this week. he really forced a one fumble, and then he was in the backfield when Jackson Arnold hitting Jackson Arnold as he threw that ball backwards in the second fumble. So
was he in there on the safety as well with Jenkins? Maybe.
I don't think so.
Okay, all right. I
could be wrong.
Might have confused him. Sorry, go ahead.
Who the second guy was there? I think it was maybe Amari Thomas. Might have been the second.
Okay.
Guy,
yeah, that was
Jenkins.
They came from the middle.
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
Eason. That's who it was.
Yeah, I think it was Eason.
Yeah, but no, he's been really good. It feels like there's been a definitive of like the pure Leo guys. It's Pierce and Josephs, and then a big drop off to Herring and Ross after them. Even I thought it was interesting in this game, even in some just in some traditional 1st and 10 situations, Josh Josephs was out on the field with Pierce more in the second half when you knew Oklahoma had to be aggressive and throw the ball more. But that's just a statement how good Josh Josephs has been in the run game, that you can play him and play 2 Leos together and they can hold up, which is something that, I wondered about in the preseason.
Exactly. I remember you talking about that. You were talking about Josh Joseph's size and if he got big enough to do it. But if he's this elite in run stuffing, then why not?
Hey, one more thing about it. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Rick.
Finish your thought. I'm changing directions.
My thought was finished. I was going to go to something else.
One more thought on Josh Josephs, and that is he's an electric interview. If you haven't gone back and watched his interview, it's on our YouTube account. I will also say this: Joshua Joseph starts every one of his press conferences by thanking Jesus Christ, and that's something off the field, that's something off related, but I love that, and that's something that's inspiring to me, who also thanks Jesus Christ for the position that I'm in right now. But it's fun to see how just full of life he is and how full of joy he is. He's talking in those games like it's not necessarily a press conference, but like he's almost giving kind of a debrief to his friends about what happened throughout the contest. He's laughing, he's making jokes. He is so he seems like a really fun guy to probably be around. And then also his sister was in our comment section for that video. And she was saying how proud of a sibling that she was. So I think that he's just a guy who, has his head on straight. He's got his priorities straight. This was the guy that we talked about over the offseason. He made that offseason jump. He was targeted and he was called out by multiple, not called out in a bad way, called out as this is the guy doing the right thing, by multiple coaches and teammates saying, this is going to be the transition for Joshua Josephs. This is going to be the year he steps up. And I think through these first 4 games, you can just tell that on the field and off the field, this guy's confident in himself. He's confident in who he is. He's confident in his ability. And he's really taking the next step up in a Dylan Sampson kind of way. I feel like he's a guy that just he elevates on swagger. He elevates himself on joy, on having fun during a game. And you can certainly tell that they're having a lot of fun out there. But Joshua Josephs, if you're watching this on YouTube, just go look through the videos real quick. Go find his interview. I think it's about 5 to 8 minutes. You won't regret it. It's a good one.
Well, one thing I was just going to say on the defensive line as a whole, and I was going to lead us into a question to Jack that I had thinking about earlier in the podcast. And I know some of y'all are probably, especially if you're not a big PFF fan, are tired of me referencing PFF stuff. But when it comes to defensive line play and stuff like that, it's just like, all right, trying to justify stuff matching up with my eyes. I know it's not the Bible. I know it's not completely what you go off of. It's the only thing that matters. But in the SEC, of all defensive linemen, edge rushers and defensive linemen, top 11 players that have played more than 10 snaps, Tennessee's got 4 of them. Josh Josephs is number 1. Omar Norman-Lott's number 5. Tyree West is 10. Amari Thomas is 11. Very interestingly, Ole Miss has 5 guys in that range. With Jared Ivey, the Princely, I don't know how to pronounce the name, the guy from Florida, Walter Nolan, Nicola Stone, and Suntarian Perkins. And that led me into the question I was going to ask Jack, that I was thinking about earlier, because you pay a lot closer attention and you talk and listen to people talk broad strokes college football a lot more than Rick and I do. It feels like Georgia's defensive line is down this year. That's usually who I would just pencil in. Who is Tennessee competing with? Who are the teams up there that Tennessee's competing with to have the best defensive line in the country?
I do think it's Ole Miss. And this was a thought before the season just because of the talent they had brought in. And they've played nobody, so their numbers are inflated. Look at their run defense numbers. They're allowing like 34 yards a game. I was thinking to myself, maybe Tennessee is the best run defense in the nation. Oh, they're second to Ole Miss, and Ole Miss is first by like 20 yards. It's pretty crazy. So Ole Miss and Alabama has a good defensive line this year, pretty stout. But when you talk about SEC, I would say it's those two, and the SEC will have the best defensive line this year. But Tennessee and Ole Miss are the ones I think that maybe are catching a lot of national media by surprise. I think people thought they would be good, but those two units are really probably the backbone. Tennessee and Ole Miss are so similar. Like their defense being elite this year after having struggled for many years of the recent history. Quarterback, Dart's a little more experienced, but both have a lot of potential and are gunslingers. Receiver depth is good, can run the ball. Coaches in similar spots a little bit as these guys who are technically unproven, like Kirby is, right? So they're the next tier of SEC coaches. I think Tennessee and Ole Miss are very similar. And one of those teams, both of them could win it all. But it would be intriguing to see if they could potentially play each other in the playoff. I don't know how that happened. It'd probably be Ole Miss coming to Knoxville. What a game that would be. But I think both of those teams are very similar.
34 rushing yards a game given up by Ole Miss, 50 for Tennessee.
Exactly.
So when you talk about a pretty significant drop-off. And yeah, Ole Miss's schedule is also pretty manageable. And
it's cake.
Yeah, they don't play like anybody until mid-late October. Like it's
they got Georgia and
is it A&M?
LSU.
Do they play out? Do they play Alabama?
No. They go on the road to LSU and they get Georgia at home. By far their toughest games.
And they don't have Texas?
Yeah.
Nope. They have Oklahoma, which now
it's
in Oxford.
Man, so Ole Miss dodges Alabama, Tennessee, and Texas in a year in which they are very, very good. That's a pretty good route to the top, I would say.
And Missouri. They got Mississippi State. They got Mississippi State, Florida, and Arkansas like Tennessee. And Kentucky like Tennessee. And they have basically the bottom that Tennessee has. We talked about all offseason how easy the bottom of Tennessee's SEC schedule is, basically with just having half of the top or 2/3 of the top, where they have Oklahoma and Georgia, but they don't have that Alabama game.
I mean, there's a bona fide clear top 5 in the SEC. Ole Miss plays one of those teams, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Tennessee will play 2.
And Georgia will play all 4.
Ridiculous.
3 of them on the road.
I'd be so mad if I was a Georgia fan. But like you said, Ryan, they've had it easy in the East for a decade. So,
they're worried. I can tell you.
Next time Tennessee takes the field will be in a week and 4 days. Right? 1, 2, 3, 4. Yep. Week and 4 days.
Something like that.
In Fayetteville, Arkansas. Another night game. Because, Tennessee's never going to play a day or afternoon game ever again. It is only night games for the rest of the year.
The Alabama game, I think, is going to be an afternoon game, though.
Yeah. Well, unless Alabama beats Georgia, then you think they might put Tennessee, Alabama on prime time, and they might move Georgia, Texas to the 3:30.
Yeah, you're probably right. It probably just comes down to who wins that game.
So if Georgia wins, Tennessee's at night, you think?
No, Georgia wins, Tennessee's during the day, I think.
Okay, gotcha.
Because that's just an unbelievable double. I know everybody talks about the week before October 12th, and it is just an incredible slate. I don't know about the whole slate on October 19th, but you talk about a doubleheader of Alabama at Tennessee, Georgia at Texas. I mean, that's pretty. It's 4 of the top 6 or 7 teams in the country right there.
That doubleheader is going to feed families.
I guess it also depends where Herbie goes of who wins this weekend, right? Because Georgia wins.
Yeah, I would assume that they'll go to, again, whoever wins, and whoever wins, it'll be the ABC 7:30 kickoff, and the other one will be the ABC or ESPN 3:30 kickoff.
Yeah. Cool. Well,
it'll be that 3:30 kickoff. Isn't Greg, isn't he on the second crew for ESPN this year?
Yeah,
I'm sure that'll have Tennessee fans very happy if
I was going to bring it up. I was going to bring it up, and I was like, yeah, so Bama loses to Georgia, and they have the 2-team, old G-Max, coming to town.
Could be an all-time people getting mad on
That's
Twitter.
Fantastic.
I'm gonna take him to
Greg McElroy calling.
Is he gonna take us out to lunch?
I'm gonna take him to Cool Beans on Friday night. What do you think? Be like, hey, love you, I promise.
Right after Knoxville wins. Right after Knoxville wins whatever this barstool competition's going on that I now am flooded with on social media about best college town. It's a pretty good time to bring him in. The place is Knoxville, Tennessee right now is the hot. I lived here for 10 years. People have lived here way longer than me, but it's by far the hottest that I've ever seen this city. I mean, it is nuclear lately.
When you got Morgan Wallen playing for 90,000 people and Peyton Manning coming out in full uniform.
The full uniform was the funniest thing.
Brew. 2 nights after baseball team natty champs with Tony come out, it is crazy.
Peyton was doing the arm windmills like he was about to go throw a slant hook on stage right. He was slapping his helmet. I thought that was one of the funniest things I've ever seen. And what a real quick on that concert, because I think it was a bona fide win for Tennessee, for the University of Tennessee and for Tennessee athletics. Holy cow, for recruiting. I mean, how often was that video everywhere? You know, you be a star at Tennessee, you get to do the walkout with Morgan Wallen. You win a championship at Tennessee, you get to do the walkout with Morgan Wallen. These guys were on ESPN, they were on CBS, they were on the New York Post, they were everywhere, right? What a recruiting moment for Tennessee, just to say, hey, this is what we have going. This is what we have our athletics built into. This is what's going on over here. I mean, the biggest 2-day event in Neyland Stadium history, I believe, as far as a non-football game or whatever the statistic is. But I thought that was just a massive win for Tennessee. One of the great weekends in University of Tennessee history, probably from start to finish. Friday, Saturday, Sunday.
There's so many of these moments of Tennessee baseball. Like, this is unbelievable. Like, you say this 7 years ago, it would just be unfathomable. And that is certainly one of them. The Tennessee baseball team walking out with Morgan Wallen with the national championship trophy to 90,000 people at Neyland Stadium. It's just like, you placed a bet on that in 2017. Not only you'd be the richest man in the world, let alone never having to work again.
Yeah, you can go buy Twitter if you'd like to. You're making money.
Yeah, no kidding.
Yeah, it's an electric time to be in Knoxville. I think we all saw it coming this fall. I think we knew this Tennessee team was a little bit special, and they look the part so far. Dominant performance in Oklahoma. Falls will keep chugging along. Open date this week, Arkansas the week after. That'll do it for this episode of the Rocky Top Insider Press Pass. You can watch us on YouTube at Rocky Top Insider. Subscribe, like, comment if you want, do all the things, because we're trying to grow
like
our
and
video
subscribe.
pod here.
Like and subscribe.
Trying to grow our video
Hit the
pod
subscribe
here on
button.
YouTube. You know how it goes.
Tell your
Console assist,
friends
where you find your podcast, of course. That's Rick Butler you hear. He's at Rick Butler on socials. And you can follow Ryan at rshump00. That's SCHUMP. Ryan, we got to talk some basketball next week, dude. I feel bad because their first official practice is this week, right?
Today. Yep. Today. First official day of practice, which really isn't all that. Like, the first official practice is just what they've been doing. They just have more hours each week, more days each week they can practice is really all that changes. But 6 weeks away, season getting closer and closer. I think we were Cam Carr days away a couple days ago.
Yeah.
Maybe Saturday night I saw that social media post, but getting closer and closer, and going to be an exciting season.
Yeah, we'll have to carve out some time next week along with our Arkansas preview to do a little bit of basketball talk, what Ryan saw at practice. But until next time, that's Rick, that's Ryan, I'm Jack. We'll see you.